Hey gamers, Treantmonk here, and welcome to our next section on Treantmonk's Guide to Wizards. Today we're talking about feats, but to be a little more specific, we're actually talking about ability score increases, because this is when we'll be selecting our feats. And one thing I've noticed is with wizard guides, including my own, it doesn't really tell you when you should be taking an ability score increase or a feat. It just tells you which feats are good or bad, and then assumes you know whether to take intelligence or the feat. So today what I want to do is I really want to talk about not only which feats are good and which ones are bad, but when you should consider taking each of them. So let's get started. Welcome to Treantmonk's Guide to Wizards. So when we have an ability score increase, and this happens at level 4, 8, 12, 16, and 19, and if you're a variant human, right at level 1. But when we have an ability score increase, we can choose whether we're going to take a feat, or we can take what I call a half feat. These are the feats that give you a little bit, plus they give you an ability score increase of +1. Or you can take an actual ability score increase. Unless you're a variant human, that one isn't an option at level 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what I call the full feats first, and then I'm going to talk about the half feats after that. And when I talk about each one, if it's something I think might be put in front of an ability score increase to intelligence, I will let you know as we talk about that feat. We will be using my normal rating system, but just a quick reminder, blue means excellent. Green means very good, and I'm recommending it. Purple means it's just fine, not a bad choice. Orange means I think it might be good, but it's circumstantially good. And red means I'm not recommending that feat. I'll also say, in general, I'm going to suggest that every wizard get their intelligence to 20, at least eventually. It doesn't necessarily have to be on your first 2 ability score increases, but by level 20, you will want to have a 20 intelligence. And I'm also going to recommend, in regard to increasing ability scores, that other than raising your intelligence to 20, generally speaking, I think feats are better than raising your secondary ability score. So, although I don't think it's necessarily a bad choice after you have an intelligence 20 to be looking at things like dexterity and constitution, I generally don't think those are your best options. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to rank them, our full feats from best to worst, and our half feats from best to worst. And I'm only really going to be talking about feats that I think are good for wizards, or that I think are often mentioned as good for wizards that I don't think are so good, just to let you know why I'm not including those as recommendations. So let's get started with our full feats. The feat I'm going to recommend the most is Warcaster. Warcaster has 3 main properties. The first one is you get advantage on saving throws for Constitution when you're making a concentration check due to damage. The second one is if your hands are full, you don't have to perform the somatic components of spells. And the third one is, if a creature provokes an attack of opportunity from you, you can cast a spell at them instead of making a weapon attack. So let's talk first about the opportunity attack. As a wizard, I wouldn't expect to be getting attacks of opportunity provoked from you very often, because you will tend to be not in melee, and therefore, unless creatures are running past you, and why would they be running past you? Usually you're the target. Usually they're running towards you. So I wouldn't expect to be making a lot of opportunity attacks. So that part of the feat really, I think, works better for other kinds of characters. Now, if you are playing a Blade Singer or something like that, it might happen a little more often, in which case I'd be using it for things like Booming Blade. I think Booming Blade makes a lot of sense, because if a creature is provoking an opportunity attack from you, it's probably because they're moving. And of course, if they're moving, then Booming Blade is going to do both its primary and its secondary damage, so it's a really good hit. That said, it's important to look at the rest of your spells as well. You might be better served by throwing something like a Tasha's Hideous Laughter on that enemy, and have the chance of taking them out of the fight altogether, depending on what they're doing. But I do think Booming Blade, particularly, is just a nice standby for use of that ability. But for most wizards, I don't think you're going to use that, probably ever. And that's not a problem. That's not why we're taking the Warcaster feat. The second thing is about the casting with your hands full. Now, I should mention that the feat specifies if your hands are full of weapons and or shields. So you can't necessarily use it if you're holding some magic items. unless those magic items are also weapons. So you could hold two staffs, two magical staffs in your hand. Those both will probably function as quarterstaffs, so they would technically qualify as weapons. So you could technically use something like that and still take advantage of that part of the feat. Again, this isn't the primary reason we're doing this. Most wizards aren't going to have a weapon and shield, though some might. We can make martial wizards, we've talked about this already, and if you do, that part of the feat becomes absolutely vital. So you want this as soon as possible, maybe for this more than anything else. But the main reason why most of us want to be taking Warcaster as soon as possible with our wizard, and by as soon as possible I mean this comes ahead, in my opinion, of increasing your intelligence. And if you are a variant human, I would take it right at level 1, or at least it would be my first choice at level 1. That is because concentration checks due to taking damage are the most common concentration checks. And not only are they the most common concentration checks, they're almost exclusively the concentration checks you're expected to make. There's going to be maybe 5% of the time where you get targeted by something like a sleet spell, or maybe your DM determines that the rocking of a boat because of a large wave maybe requires a concentration check. But for the most part, it's just going to be about taking damage. So Warcaster is going to come into play on almost every concentration check you make. And when we look at the mechanics of advantage versus say what you get with resilient constitution, which gives you proficiency bonus, we are going to find that advantage at low levels delivers much more effectively. So the most common concentration check you're going to make is going to be DC 10. And that's because anytime you take 21 points of damage or less, that's going to be the DC of the concentration check. So that's the kind of concentration check that you make more than any other. And now if you are playing a wizard and let's say you have a 14 constitution, that means you have a 35% chance to fail that check. So you will still probably make that save, you just can't count on it. Taking resilient constitution at that level will reduce that chance to fail to 25%. Which isn't a huge difference, but Warcaster will reduce the chance to fail to 12%. Still can happen sometimes, but it is far less likely than either with Resilient or without anything at all. At level 5, it continues to serve you better than Resilient Constitution. Same thing at level 9. It's not till level 13 that we actually see Resilient Constitution start to outpace Warcaster, down to the point where you're only looking at a 10% chance of failure. Now, this could be different if your constitution started at an odd number for some reason. So if you have a 13 constitution or a 15 constitution, then Resilient Con might be the better option for you. But for most wizards, we're just going to kind of plan our constitution so it's even, because that tends to be the most efficient build. And then in that case, what I'd be looking at level 1 if you're a variant human, or level 4 if you're any other race of wizard, I'd be looking at Warcaster. Now I've played wizards a fair bit, and what I'll find is level 4 will come around and I don't feel like taking Warcaster because my experience from levels 1 through 4 has been that I haven't been concentrating a lot and that I haven't had my concentration tested a lot. So then I'm thinking I would kind of like that intelligence. You get additional preparations, your spells are harder to resist. I've been using a lot of cantrips at this point and they hit a lot easier if my intelligence is higher. From level 4 through level 8, we're going to find that we're using our concentration a lot more, especially once we hit level 5. So this is really an investment for the way the game is going to change starting at level 4. And that's why I think Warcaster is an important feat to take at level 4. If you take it at level 8, I think you're late to the game. The next feat I want to talk about is, in my opinion, the best feat in the game, Lucky. Lucky, of course, is good for any character, and it's really good for wizards. And it's really good for wizards in the same way that Warcaster is, because we can use it to get advantage on our concentration saving throws. Now, I've mentioned this before, and people have said to me, but Lucky runs out really fast. But the thing is that we can apply Lucky after we see the die roll. So we already know what we need to roll to save, and if we didn't roll that, then we can apply Lucky at that point. So if you think about the fact that we have a 35% chance to fail our concentration saves, that means 65% of the time we roll, we don't need to apply the Lucky feat. We only need to apply it to those 35%. So suddenly you have to be taking a ton of hits before you would run out of Lucky. And frankly, if you're taking that many hits, then concentration is the least of your worries. You're going to die. You don't have that many hit points. Now the reason I did mention Warcaster first is, number one, because you don't have to worry about the number of times you need to make the roll, and number two, because there are those secondary things as well. Though with Lucky there are secondary things as well too. You don't have to use your Lucky on concentration saves. Generally, if I take Lucky with a wizard, then what I'm looking at is using it on concentration saves that are important that I fail. If a battle's nearly over and we're winning and my concentration is threatened, do I really want to waste a Lucky on that? Maybe not. Maybe it's not even necessary at that point. But I will use it on any important concentration save. And then if a critical hit is rolled against me, I probably want to use it then as well, because I hate getting hit with critical hits, because wizards can get a pretty good armor class, but we can't really stop a critical hit, except with something like a mirror image. So I really view Lucky as kind of an alternative to Warcaster. I don't think you need both, though maybe at high levels you might want to take both, because Lucky, of course, is good for a lot of other things as well. But in general, I would be looking at one or the other at 4th level, or 1st level if you're a variant human. The next one I'm going to put in is the +2 intelligence stat boost, because every other feat I'm going to mention now, I'd probably put below getting my intelligence up to 20. The next feat I want to talk about is Alert. And Alert is tough to rate because that +5 to initiative it provides can be so important, as well as the ability to avoid being surprised, because often when we're doing battlefield control, we're debuffing. It's so important that we get this in place before the enemy attacks. Even if we're doing defensive spells, like a mirror image, having that up before the enemy attacks can be vital. But I do think initiative bonuses are so important for wizards that Alert is very good and well worth taking. Would I take it before raising my intelligence to 20? Maybe. I might consider it. It would really depend on what kind of spells I'm casting. But if they are spells that are going to be benefiting a lot from winning initiative, I might even consider taking Alert ahead of raising my intelligence. But we do want to avoid getting in that trap where, we take Warcaster, then we take Alert. Now it's level 12 and we're still working off a 16 intelligence, and that DC isn't where it needs to be. And so suddenly creatures aren't failing their saving throws. And if we are relying on spells that require enemies to fail their saving throws, then it doesn't matter if we can maintain our concentration. It didn't matter that we went first, because creatures are ignoring those effects. So there is a balance to strike there. But I do think there is an advantage to getting Alert in those mid levels. Now, would I ever take Alert ahead of ways to mitigate concentration? Again, I might. It would really depend. I think overall the ways to mitigate concentration is better. But if we decided to go the route of initiative, if we can win initiative, and we'll never win initiative reliably, even if we're playing a war mage with Alert, we can't always win initiative. But if we can win initiative reasonably reliably, and then we can alleviate the need to make concentration rolls because we've effectively raised defenses or controlled the battlefield, then there's real argument that Alert might be better than Warcaster. So it really depends on the build, and you could play it either way. I think overall you're going to have a higher measure of success with Warcaster or Lucky than you will doing Alert and going for that initiative grab. So the next feat I want to talk about is Tough. And Tough just gives you 2 extra hit points per level. And now, I've heard a lot of people say that maybe having +2 to Constitution is better because it increases your saves and your hit points. But I don't think that's the case. I think 2 hit points per level really stacks up. That's just twice as much as if you had raised your Constitution. And remember, we are rolling a d6 for hit points, so we are going to have less hit points than anybody else in the party, likely, depending on their Constitution. But very likely, we will have the lowest hit points in the party. Tough can change that. Suddenly, we have hit points that's comparable to your martial classes. And remember that a lot of those classes might eventually take Tough as well, so this might just be a matter of keeping up with them. And no matter how many defenses we have, no matter how many different ways we can use spells to alleviate damage, sometimes we just get hit, and we just can't avoid it. And when that happens, often those kind of attacks are based on the idea that your average character is going to have this many hit points. But as a wizard, we're having less. Tough helps bring that up. So suddenly, the thing that would take down half the party, we might not be part of that half. Whenever I've taken toughness with a wizard, I've never found that I regret it later. So the next 3 feats I'm going to mention all have something in common, and that is that I think they're all pretty good feats for wizards at lower levels, and I don't think they are all that great at higher levels. And the other problem with these feats is that I don't think any of them are better than raising your intelligence. So then these feats might not even be available to late levels, and then you really can't do much with them. But sometimes there's house rules. Sometimes I've heard lots of DMs give a free feat at level 1. I've heard a lot of DMs give a free racial feat at level 1. So I really do want to mention these feats just because you may have an opportunity to take them that other people don't. The other possibility is you choose to take them because you really like the flavor of them, and instead of maybe taking a feat that maybe boosts your concentration saves. And in general, I think these are weaker selections than that, but I don't think these are awful selections. So let's just go through them now. And these are not in any particular order. First one is Wood Elf Magic. Now, this one is probably not going to be available to you because Wood Elf really isn't a great race for wizards, so why are you playing a Wood Elf in the first place? And then secondly, of course, this isn't necessarily giving you the best things at low level. But if you, say, rolled your stats and you wanted to play a Wood Elf and you decided to go with a Wood Elf, I would at least look at this because it gives you 3 spells. It gives you a cantrip, a first level spell, and a second level spell. And they're all really good. I mean, the first one is the cantrip, but you can take guidance. And guidance is a lovely cantrip for a wizard to have. And then our first level spell is Longstrider, which isn't a super powerful spell, but it doesn't use concentration. It's something we might use even at higher levels. And it's a decent spell. And then we get Pass Without Trace, which is a wonderful second level spell. And these are all supposedly based on your wisdom, but wisdom has no bearing on how these spells work, so that doesn't hurt us at all. And these are lovely spells for wizards. You get to be able to cast Longstrider and the Pass Without Trace once per day for free, so it's additional slots as well. And they're spells known, so they go in your spellbook. You can use your wizard slots for them. But again, I don't see a lot of characters that are going to have the option to take Wood Elf Magic, because you have to be a Wood Elf, which isn't a recommended race for wizards. And if your intelligence suffered from taking Wood Elf, then it really hurts to not be raising your intelligence at every opportunity. The second one is Healer. And Healer I don't think is a very great feat at high levels, but at low levels it allows you a couple useful things. If somebody's in the process of making death saving throws, you can stabilize them and they regain a hit point. So that's super useful. And then as well, once per rest, you can actually heal a creature as an action. It's not a lot of hit points, but it's something. And the idea is with this, I think it works well for wizards because they can often spare those actions. Because often they're busy just concentrating on a spell. And then they don't have a lot to do between there. They might, throw cantrips or something. Well, being able to heal party members, especially ones that maybe have gone down, is a useful thing to be able to do. So the next feat I want to talk about is the Magic Initiate feat, specifically the Magic Initiate feat for druids. And what it would do is it would give you 2 cantrips. The first one you would take, of course, is Guidance, which is a lovely cantrip for wizards to have. And then the second one doesn't matter so much. We probably don't want to take anything based on our wisdom because we're not concentrating on our wisdom. So a utility cantrip like a Mending spell is a good option. And then with our first level spell, then we would select Goodberry. And Goodberry would give us 10 good berries per day. And the idea would be that we would give them to our familiar, and our familiar could use their action to deliver those to party members who maybe have gone down. Now, officially under the rules, and we've talked about this before, officially under the rules, there's nothing saying you can use your action to give a good berry to somebody else. There's kind of a precedent because with healing potions, there are specific rules that you can use your action to give them to somebody else. So can your familiar deliver a good berry? Well, it's going to be up to your DM. I will say that Jeremy Crawford has been asked this specifically. He said he would allow it. So again, it's not covered under the rules, and I would really make sure that it's something that's going to be legal before you bother looking at this feat. Because if it's not going to be legal, then I wouldn't even bother. Now I'm going to talk about the circumstantial feats. So these are feats I might take with specific builds, but I definitely wouldn't take them with just any build. And the first one is the Elemental Adept feat. So what you do with Elemental Adept is you pick a specific type of damage, and then your spells that deal that damage can ignore resistances. They also, if you roll 1s on damage rolls, they become 2s. That second one isn't that big. It actually doesn't end up being a lot of damage. You roll a fireball, you're probably going to roll 1 or 2 1s. So that means your fireballs are going to be doing maybe 1 or 2 points more on average if you take this feat. The resistance one is the bigger one because lots of creatures have resistance, especially to fire, and fire is what you would want to take with this because the spells for wizard tend to be stronger on the fire side. So you would look to take elemental affinity for fire, concentrate on fire spells, you get a little bit of extra damage, and then you can ignore resistances. But it's important to note you don't ignore immunities, and fire immunity isn't all that rare either. So just be aware that if you really concentrate on just one type of damage spell, then you can end up in this corner where you fight something that's immune and you don't have a lot to do. Now, I tend to find this would happen more often with something like a Draconic Sorcerer than it would with a Wizard, because with a Wizard we can usually prepare one or two other spells, maybe control spells, to give us at least something else useful to do in combat. Just make sure you're careful to do that. Now, with an Evoker, remember, we don't have to just concentrate on fire spells. We could take a little bit of everything, because usually our bonuses to those spells don't rely on it being a specific type of damage. Only by taking this feat do you really kind of shoehorn yourself into one type of damage. So I think this feat could be good for an Evoker. I don't think it's great for an Evoker, but if you're concentrating on fire damage, you're concentrating on blasting, it's definitely something I would consider. Svirfneblin Magic. That's the one that's in the Elemental Evil Player's Companion that Deep Gnomes can take. That gives them the non-detection spell that they can cast over and over again. And they get a couple of little things beyond that as well. And generally speaking, I'm not going to recommend this for Wizards, but if you want to take advantage of the loophole that I talked about in the Races Guide, where you can use an Abjure and then use non-detection to help replenish your Arcane Ward, then you would need this feat to achieve that. Now, before you go ahead and plan this, there's a couple things I would recommend. Number one, know your table, because this is an exploit. This is something that I don't think the rules were intended to allow you to do. And I kind of think why this didn't end up being a racial feat in the Xanathar's Guide, because a lot of the Elemental Player's Companion ended up in Xanathar's. This did not, and I don't think that's a mistake. So although it is technically official material, it does employ that exploit, and not all tables are going to appreciate that. The second thing I'm going to mention is that because it's in the Elemental Player's Companion, it may not be available in your campaign. Not all DMs are going to allow that source, so that's something also to keep in mind. That said, if it's going to be okay with your table, and it's legal material for your campaign, then doing this exploit is pretty effective. And if you want to do this exploit, you must have this feat. So that's why I want to mention it here. It's really just for that kind of character. So let's talk about a few feats that I've heard recommended for Wizards before that I personally don't recommend. The first one is Crossbow Expert. So people will recommend Crossbow Expert for Wizards because they can then, if they get stuck in melee, they don't get disadvantage with their ranged spell attacks. And I never understand this argument. You're making wizards that don't have spells that don't require ranged spell attacks? How are you even doing that? There's not that many wizard spells that require spell attacks. So I think this is just theory crafting. People assume that there's a ton of wizard spells that require ranged spell attacks, but they're wrong. Most wizard spells require saving throws, not spell attacks. Now, a number of cantrips require ranged spell attacks, but I'm not taking a feat to improve my cantrips. That's a terrible idea. Cantrips aren't that great, and if you're worried about getting in melee, just take a Toll the Dead cantrip, or any other cantrip that doesn't require a hit roll. Poison Spray, Acid Splash, you have options. Taking an entire feat for a wizard not to have disadvantage when they're making spell attacks in melee is just ridiculous. It's so easy for you to get around that without dealing with feats. Another one I often hear mentioned is Defensive Duelist, because you could carry something like a dagger in your offhand, and then you can get a +2 AC if you're targeted with an attack. And this also sounds good, except we just have a better option. Shield is so much better than this. Now, Shield uses a spell slot. This doesn't use a spell slot. But how many attacks are you getting targeted with? If you're getting targeted with a lot of attacks, then this isn't going to help you, because it only helps you against one attack per round. Shield will help you because it will take care of all the attacks in a round. Now, if you're not being targeted with a lot of attacks, then you probably have the spell slots available for the shield. So again, it's the better option. Now, if you really just look at this +2 against one attack, that's just awesome. I can't avoid taking that. Then just be a War Mage. And with Arcane Deflection, this is the minor ability you get with Arcane Deflection. And you don't even have to carry a weapon to be able to do it. So this just becomes so redundant with things we can already do and lesser to it, and it requires a feat slot. So I've heard of this mentioned as a recommendation for wizards. I don't recommend it at all. The next feat I'm not recommending is Spell Sniper, and I hear this one for wizards too. But I really don't see the point in taking Spell Sniper unless I'm a character that's really concentrating on using cantrips in combat, like maybe you might with a Warlock using Eldritch Blast. But what you get with Wizard is basically you're doubling the range of your attack cantrips, they can ignore cover, and you get one additional attack cantrip. And you can choose which class you get that attack cantrip from. Of course, you're an intelligence-based character, so if you take something like Eldritch Blast, you're just going to be disappointed because it's based off your charisma, so you're going to miss all the time. So you end up taking another wizard spell. So you get another spell like Firebolt or Ray of Frost. And then, yeah, you're doubling your range and you're ignoring cover. These things are not worth a feat. Cantrips are not delivering a lot of damage for us. Cantrips are really just the thing to do when you have nothing else to do. It's usually what you do in easy fights or fights where you're concentrating on something already that's useful and you just want something to do. So you throw a cantrip. And in those cases, it's fine, but you definitely don't want to be investing feats to enhance that. Your cantrips just aren't going to deliver a lot of damage. They're just not. So spending a feat to make sure they hit so that they don't deliver good damage is just not a good choice, in my opinion. So let's switch and talk about those half feats. So these are the feats that are going to give you a plus to an ability score and something else. The first one I want to talk about, of course, is Resilient Constitution. So Resilient Constitution is going to give you a +1 to your Constitution score. It's give you proficiency in Constitution saves. This is a feat I'm pretty much always going to take with a wizard, but I will tend to take it at higher levels. So I'm going to get my intelligence up to 20 before I take Resilient Constitution almost every time. If for some reason I have a first level wizard who ended up with an odd Constitution score, I might consider taking Resilient Constitution instead of something like Warcaster at level 4 or at level 1 if I'm a variant human. But that doesn't happen very often. And even then, we're still not getting a better boost from Resilient Constitution until level 9. Now I should mention that Resilient Constitution does help you on all Constitution saving throws. So every concentration saving throw you would need to make, plus every other kind of Constitution save you make, like things against poison, that kind of thing. And so it does have value beyond what Warcaster will give you. But if we're just talking about mitigating concentration saves, it's just not as good as Warcaster at lower levels, even if you have an odd Constitution score. But our proficiency bonus is eventually going to get to +6. So as we get higher in level, usually around level 12 or level 16, I'm definitely going to be taking a serious look at this feat with any kind of wizard I make. Now, the rest of these feats, I've rated them all orange. People are often confused with the orange rating because they think that means I'm not recommending the feat. Orange means it's circumstantially good. So remember that with these feats, in the right circumstances, I'm absolutely recommending them. And the first one is Moderately Armored. So Moderately Armored isn't raising the right ability scores for us. We're either going to get a +1 strength or dexterity boost. But the reason we might want to take Moderately Armored is because if we are a hobgoblin, then we are going to have light armor proficiency. And light armor proficiency, as I mentioned in my races video, delivers something to us, but not a lot. But if we can get half plate and a shield, which moderately armored would give us, the boost to our armor class is massive. So massive that that's absolutely worth a feat. It might even be worth our 4th level feat. Because remember, if we're talking about mitigating concentration saves, the best way to mitigate concentration saves is not to get hit in the first place. And Moderately Armored is going to achieve that to pretty good effect for our Hobgoblin. So it's not just protecting the concentration of our spells, it's also protecting our hit points. Now in 99% of Hobgoblin builds I make, I'm looking at the +1 to dexterity, not the +1 to strength. But in either case, I think if you are a Hobgoblin, this is an excellent feat. Of course, if you're not a Hobgoblin, this is likely not available to you unless you're a Blade Singer. And if you're a Blade Singer, you absolutely should not take this, of course, because you can't use medium armor and shields with Blade Song. The next one is Fey Teleportation. So if you are a High Elf and you have an odd intelligence score, this is going to be better for you than just raising your intelligence by quite a bit. Because not only does it bring your intelligence to that next level, but you're going to be able to get the Misty Step spell and use it once per day for free. So again, not only can you use it once for free. It becomes a spell known, which means now you can use your regular spell slots for it as well. You would need to prepare it to be able to do that. But nevertheless, being able to use it once per day is a terrific way to get a secondary feat benefit from a half feat. The next one I'm going to mention is Flames of Phlegethos. So if you are a tiefling wizard, then this is a racial feat available to you that gives you a +1 to your intelligence score, or your charisma, but of course to your intelligence score. So if you are playing a tiefling wizard with an odd intelligence, then this is a good feat for you because not only do you get the benefits of increasing your intelligence bonus, but you're going to get some certain bonuses for casting fire-based spells, like a fireball, which you can definitely expect to be casting as a wizard, certainly if you're an evoker. So it does a few little things for us. Number one, anytime we roll a fire damage spell and we roll a 1, we can re-roll that 1, but only once per spell. So if you roll a couple 1s on a fireball, you only get to re-roll 1 of those dice. But it will result in fireballs doing a little bit more damage on average, and fire spells doing a little bit more damage on average. And what it does is it sheds light, and then if something attacks you in melee, it takes a tiny bit of damage. This one is pretty minor. It's mainly about just re-rolling the 1 die on damage rolls, which is okay, but if we're in a position where we have an odd intelligence score, it doesn't do us any good to raise it to another odd number. So raising it to an even number and getting even these minor benefits is still worthwhile. Now, if we aren't a high elf and we aren't a tiefling and we have an odd intelligence score, so we want to take a feat with +1 to intelligence and give us something else, we only have 2 choices, and that's Keen Mind and Observant. And I'm just going to mention them here together. I kind of think they're very similar. Neither of them is going to give you a lot. The first one I want to talk about is Observant. So what Observant does is you get your +1 to your intelligence, then you can read lips. Now, reading lips isn't going to come up a lot, but if we're doing something like a clairvoyance spell, it could be useful for that, because sometimes we can see things, but we can't hear them, and then we can still then read lips. Works with something like Arcane Eye as well. And then the second thing we get is we get a bonus to our passive perception checks and our passive investigation. Now, I have never, in all my years of playing 5th edition, had any DM ask me what my passive investigation is, so I wouldn't expect to use that at all. But I have been asked many times what my passive perception is, and if you've been playing D&D, you probably have too, because it comes up if things are trying to sneak up on you, it comes up if things are trying to steal stuff from you, so that actually does come in handy. Now, it's not going to help you with your active perception checks, it's only your passive. So it does limit what it's useful for, but there are situations where it is handy for you. So overall, Observant, again, it's not bringing a whole lot besides the bonus to intelligence, but there's a couple things there that are pretty useful. The other one is Keen Mind. So Keen Mind, again, gives you +1 intelligence. It allows you to know which way is north, so it's harder to get lost. That's not a huge benefit. I mean, your background may give you a better benefit than that if you took something like Outlander. And then you can keep time because you know when the next sunset and sunrise is. This, again, is just so circumstantial. I don't see it coming up very often. The final one is you have perfect recall memory. This one is actually pretty good because you forgot to take the notes on that creature. It really depends on the DM. Some DMs are more than happy to just review with you things you may have forgotten that your character might not have forgotten because it was important or because your character might have written it down. But if you have a DM that's a stickler, did you make notes? Suddenly Keen Mind is going to be useful to you because then you can say, no, I didn't, but I have the Keen Mind feat, so tell me because I have perfect recall. Now, how perfect this recall is debatable. It basically just says that you can accurately recall things. Now, eidetic memory is not perfect. So, technically speaking, if we're saying it's perfectly accurate, then if you are a conjurer, you might be able to remember the key that you saw that will unlock the cage that you're in. But I wouldn't count on DMs thinking it's that accurate. But I do think Keen Mind can be useful, especially for just recalling campaign facts that you may have not written down. Sometimes you don't know something's important in the campaign until later. And then once you realize it's important, then it might be handy to be able to have the DM actually list those things in detail for you. And again, some DMs will anyway, and if that's the kind of DM you have, then maybe this feat isn't the one. Maybe you would take Observant instead. But if your DM is one of those sticky ones, then this might be the better feat for you. So those are all the feats I either recommend for wizards or I hear recommended for wizards that I don't recommend. And again, so when I'm looking at a wizard, generally speaking, at early levels, I'm looking at ways to mitigate my concentration save. Because once we get into those mid levels, that's when it's going to start to happen. You're going to be making concentration saves all the time because you can lock down hordes of enemies, but you're concentrating. And if they break your concentration, then that lockdown all breaks down. Just imagine a hypnotic pattern. Maybe you target 8 different enemies and 4 of them fail. So now 4 of them are incapacitated. Those other 4 have reason to attack you. And if you lose your concentration, that can affect that outcome of that battle significantly. Because if they can't get rid of your concentration, then it is just a cleanup for your party. So finding a way to mitigate that concentration, I do think, is my ultimate suggestion. Whether that's through improving that saving throw, or that's through making it harder for you to hit, or that's through winning initiative and therefore making it hard for them to target you in the first place. But one way or the other, that's the first thing I'm going to be thinking about. Once I've mitigated my concentration saves, even to a small degree, now I really want to get that intelligence up. So certainly by level 12, I want to have a 20 intelligence. Once I have a 20 intelligence, now I'm going to look at some of those other feats that I mentioned. And it might even be another feat that helps your concentration saves. It's okay to double up Warcaster and Resilient. They actually work very nicely together because now your chance of failing saving throws against concentration is just ridiculously low, even if you take a lot of damage. But we'll go more into detail on that when we get into our build videos. As for next week, we're going to start talking about equipment and magic items for wizards. So I hope to see you then. Until then, I'm going to sit back, I'm going to relax, I'm going to have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, and I'll see you next time for equipment and magic items.